Have you ever walked into a room that should have been locked and found it open? That dark slit in the doorframe, that silent and forbidden invitation to the unknown. Now, imagine yourself alone in a silent school at night, where the only sounds are the echo of your own footsteps in the empty hallways, and the beating of your own heart. And then, you hear something that simply shouldn't be there. That's exactly what happened to a man, a janitor during his night shift, and what he witnessed at night forever altered his perception of safety, and how he viewed the darkness. Stay with me, and get ready to dive into this chilling true story. Our janitor, a man named Samuel, worked at a large high school, one of those old buildings with decades of stories etched into its walls. His night shift was a world apart. While the city slept, he immersed himself in a profound silence, broken only by the low hum of the staff room refrigerator or the occasional creak of the building's structure cooling down. His routine was methodical, almost a ritual: walk corridor by corridor, turn off lights, empty trash cans, and, most importantly, check every lock. He knew that building like the back of his hand: every creaky step, every sticky door, every shadow cast by a specific streetlight. But there was one place, an entire floor, that always sent a shiver down his spine: the third floor. It was the oldest part of the school, a time capsule. The classrooms up there were rarely used, some permanently locked, forgotten by time. Others had become storage for dusty books, yellowed maps, and old furniture covered by white sheets that, in the gloom, took on sinister shapes. Samuel always did that round as quickly as possible, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. On that particular night, everything started as usual. He turned off the lights in the main hallway, went up the service stairs, and walked through the third floor. He did his check, door by door. All locked. He was sure of it. Hours later, near the end of his shift, he decided to take one last walk to confirm everything was in order. It was then that his heart began to beat. As he passed by one of the storage rooms, the very one he would have sworn he checked and found locked, the door was now slightly ajar. His first instinct, that primitive scream in his brain, was to simply keep going. Ignore it. After all, the mind plays tricks, especially in the dark and when tired. It could have been a memory lapse. But then, something made him stop. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, colder. It was as if the room itself was calling to him, challenging his logic. With a knot in his throat, he leaned his mop against the wall, his hands slightly damp. Each step he took towards the door echoed in the empty hallway, a solitary drum announcing his approach. The feeling of being watched grew with every second, a weight on his shoulders. He felt the eyes of someone, or something, following him from the darkness ahead. The small, dirty glass window in the door was black, reflecting only his own pale face and the trembling beam of his flashlight. With the tips of his fingers, he pushed the door. The low creak it made seemed to tear through the silence like a scream. The flashlight beam swept across the interior, dancing over stacks of chairs, shelves crammed with old books, and shapes covered by sheets. Everything seemed in its place. Relief began to wash over him. But it was short-lived. It was then that his eyes fixed on an object in the center of the dusty wooden floor. A cardboard box, one of those used for filing records. He remembered perfectly seeing it earlier that very night, leaning against the wall, under a blackboard. Now, it was about 2 meters away, slightly twisted, and there were drag marks in the dust connecting it to its original spot. His mind, desperate for an anchor of rationality, began to search for explanations. "You are tired, Samuel. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Or maybe a rat, or a cat that had gotten in. But a rodent wouldn't drag a box that size. And the cold? The icy air that seemed to emanate from the room itself. And that oppressive, undeniable feeling that he was not alone. He took a few steps back into the hallway, his body trembling. And that's when he heard it. Something that froze him to the marrow. It wasn't the wind whistling through the windows, it wasn't the heating system. It was a breath. Slow, deep, and deliberate. It came from the end of the hallway, from the absolute darkness beyond the reach of his flashlight. It was the sound of someone. Or something. Inhaling and exhaling with terrifying calm. His heart raced, hammering against his ribs. He pointed the flashlight towards the source of the sound, his hand shaking so much that the beam of light danced wildly across the walls. There was no one? Only a black and infinite void. The classroom door remained open, the box on the floor was a silent accusation, and that impossible sound of breathing echoed in his mind, poisoning every thought. Samuel decided to retreat. His courage had left him. But every step he took towards the stairs was accompanied by the overwhelming feeling that someone was following him, staying purposely just out of reach of his light. He tried to speak, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "Is anyone there?" The silence swallowed his words, answering him only with absolute contempt. After minutes that felt like an eternity, he reached the office, grabbed the phone, and dialed his supervisor. His voice was a thread, trembling, as he tried to explain the inexplicable. The supervisor, half asleep, promised to arrive in 20 minutes. They were the longest 20 minutes of Samuel's life, sitting under the fluorescent office light, staring into the darkness of the hallway, waiting for something to emerge from it. When the supervisor arrived, the two went up together, a strength in numbers. They entered the room. Everything seemed normal. Except for the box. Displaced in the center of the floor, exactly as Samuel had described. They searched every corner, every closet, every possible space. Nothing. No sign of intrusion, no explanation. The supervisor shrugged, attributing it to fatigue, and an active imagination. Samuel tried to convince himself of that, but deep down, he knew the truth. That fear had been real. Months later, in conversation with an older teacher, he learned a disturbing fact. Years before, a student, as a prank, had hidden in that same room overnight. Whatever he experienced inside, or whatever happened to him, was so serious and traumatic that the room was sealed and never used for classes again. Yet, even with this sinister context, the breathing Samuel heard in the hallway and the box that moved on its own remained unexplained. Sometimes the most ordinary places can become the scariest settings, especially when we are alone and vulnerable. For this janitor, the night shift routine was never the same. The feeling of being watched, the sound of that impossible breathing, and the box that seemed to move on its own, remain in his memory to this day. And you? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain, alone in a place that should have been safe? If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling true accounts, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And tell us in the comments, could you face a room like this alone at night?